The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Forget the news of the day. Tonight, some solace, joy, and insight from Ontario's first ever Poet Laureate, Randell Adjei. Then our Ontario Hub's report on getting help for kids in crisis. And from the future of virtual healthcare to declining male fertility, we've got the Agenda's Week in Review. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. It's Friday, May 7th, and that's next on the agenda. Forever lately, it seems government announcements involve crisis and tragedy. But last month, a departure that we probably need more than we realize. A historic motion passed proclaiming Ontario's first ever Poet Laureate. He is Scarborough, Ontario's own Randell Adjei. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I'm also in Scarborough, so this might be a first for TVO. Two Scarboroughians into talking to each other. I don't know.
It's incredible. Scarborough to the world. Scarborough to the world.
It's so great. But first off, congratulations. What does it mean to you on a personal level to be chosen as Ontario's first ever Poet Laureate?
I think on a personal level, I'm excited. It means so much to me. And I think what it really means is that more poets across the province see that this is actually an opportunity for them to continue doing the work that they do. It means that I feel like I've worked so hard. A lot of people are only seeing the results, but don't know all the work that has been put in behind the scenes. And I remember a lot of folks that doubted me and told me that this wasn't something that was good, wasn't something I should have done, that I was too smart to do poetry. And I think when you follow your vision, there's something quite beautiful about that.
That's very interesting that people doubted you. Looking back now, why do you think they doubted you?
I look back on some people saying I was too smart, some people who just didn't see the vision as far as poetry being an opportunity or a tool or like I guess a path for success. And it was kind of discouraging, but it was my vision and I'm glad to see it come to light.
It's interesting that you said that people discourage you from becoming a poet because you're too smart. Shakespeare, was a poet, and I don't know if people ever said that he was too smart. Do you think that maybe a part of it is what people think a poet should look like?
I think there is a part of that as well too, and it may have some stigma around, the artist's life, the artist's way. Being an artist isn't an easy path, but I feel like a lot of folks were encouraging me to go the easy path, the path that would have actually guaranteed me a certain amount of income or a certain level of stature. But I think more so than anything, just this opportunity to be here, I think it does, representation is important. And for other young Black men and women or boys and girls who are, really looking to take their art to the next level, really inspired, can be inspired by this moment. And I think it's quite beautiful to be in this position.
You mentioned that people tried to sway you from becoming a poet because, the artist life is hard. And this past year during the pandemic, I think it's hit artists in such a more monumental way than we realize. What's it been like? What's it been like for you as an artist to navigate the pandemic?
Well, Nina Simone says, as an artist, we have the responsibility to talk about what's happening during our time and, in society. And I think equally, it's important for a poet, to recognize that there's an opportunity here where our words can inspire, where our words can bring us together, where our words can galvanize and really allow folks to recognize that there is more, although we're in this together, that we can overcome. So it was difficult for me. I'm not going to lie, as a poet, not being able to be on stage and be in the community and work with students and work with young people. It was challenging. At the same time, I think there's something quite special about looking inward. It gave me the opportunity to do some introspection, to reflect on my purpose, my life, and where I'm heading in life. And I also got to work on some childhood trauma, which gave me the opportunity to write. And that's the thing about poetry. I think poetry can be a cathartic release.
You mentioned this time has allowed you for some introspection. What have you learned about yourself this past year?
I've learned that there's a little boy inside of me that has dealt with a lot of adversity and a lot of challenges. and that he still needs some healing, and that this little boy just was really looking, for a hug for a long time. But I think what it's also taught me is about my level of resilience, and that introspection, I believe, can be one of the best, things, because I guess there's 7 billion different ways to look at life, and we all have an opportunity to look at it in a very unique way. And so when you can show up as yourself, as your authentic self, and really deepen your sense of identity, there's something quite powerful about that. So I've learned that no matter how far I go, that there's still so much more to go. And even with this appointment, I'm excited, but I think the pandemic's just taught me just stay the course, stay present, and stay the course.
This post is a 2-year post. So hopefully by this time the second year rolls around, the world will be very different. So what do you hope to accomplish in the 2 years that you're in this post?
I've got some really inspiring poetry to share. I'd love to travel the province and share some poetry, and also create a platform for other poets to come up and, just talk about their experiences, what's happened for them. I want to encourage more writing, because I do think writing is cathartic. I think poetry is cathartic. And the great thing about poetry, I've been saying this quite a bit, is it really allows us to have dialogue that normal conversation doesn't necessarily allow us to have. And so by traveling the province, encouraging other poets and other writers to pick up the pen, I'm also hoping to, go to schools, different school boards, and bring poetry into the classroom, because it literally saved my life.
How did it save your life?
So I was a grade 8 student. I was just really angry, not sure about what was happening in my life, still dealing with some, personal issues that were happening with me. And the opportunity was meeting in my grade 8 teacher, and her giving me a pen and a paper. And she said, "Tell me your story." And that pen, literally helped me tell my story. And that paper listened when no one else would. I was that troubled young man that no one wanted to listen to. I got written off many times. And so it saved my life, because it allowed me to tell my story, it allowed me to recognize that although I've been here, that I have so much more to do and so much further to go. And even more so, for the first time, I really felt understood for the first time.
How did you feel understood?
I felt as though no one judged me for my story. The paper didn't judge me for what I had to say. That teacher didn't judge me for what I had to say. And I think it also reminded me that poetry can be just a very enlightening, artistic form, or introspective artistic form. And so just feeling understood, feeling like I belonged for the first time, feeling like there was something that I could do that was deep, something deep within me that just woke up and was alive.
You mentioned your grade 8 teacher. You had the opportunity to speak to them this week. How did the conversation go?
We've been texting back and forth for a little bit, and we're going to connect again soon. And the conversation was just, a lot of pride and a lot of joy. She feels really grateful to have played such a role in my life. And she doesn't even really take any credit. She just kind of it was her second year of teaching, and she just kind of did what innately felt right. But a lot of it is just I'm proud of you, I'm happy for you, and we're going to be working together. I'm going to go to her school that she's now a principal at, and work with her to see what we can do at her school.
A full circle moment, as they say, right?
Full circle indeed.
Yeah.
Full circle
So you
indeed.
can maybe inspire other kids that might be in your position, the position that you were in.
That's the goal. And I think educators and teachers have this immense opportunity. I know it's difficult for teachers and educators at this point in time to teach online and teach virtually when you're not able to really connect with students on that level. But at the same time, I think there's an immense opportunity that teachers and educators have. And as an educator, that's exactly what I'm hoping to do. I'm really hoping to bring this in the classroom and provide tools, provide opportunities for young people to deepen their sense of self-identity.
You talked about poetry and being able to connect with people, and somebody that a lot of Canadians connected with was Gord Downie, who was the Tragically Hip's lead singer. How is he connected to this new position?
Well, first of all, this is in his legacy, in his honor. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for his legacy, the poetry he wrote. I feel like the connection between our work is that we've seen social justice issues, and we were just folks who just knew that our poetry and our words could at least raise awareness, or that we could advocate or speak out for the injustice that was happening. I had the pleasure of speaking with his daughter and two brothers yesterday, Michael, Patrick, and Willow. And, I got welcomed into the family. It was a very beautiful moment for me just to talk to them and listen to them and learn more about Gord from their perspective. Thinking about Gord, I'm grateful, I'm honored, and I want to just continue and further his legacy.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, you are a poet, you are an artist, and this past year we've dealt with a lot of difficult news. A lot of people have lost so much and are continuing to lose so much. I just wanted to see, if maybe you could offer us some words of wisdom through a poem for us, for our audience.
Absolutely. I have this poem. I'm thinking about two things. There's one poem that I have called Brokenness, and another one called The Power of the Tongue. But I think brokenness is fitting, for those who are listening. I think this might be fitting for them. In life, I realized that no matter the color of our skin, how much money we have in our pocket, who we are, how good we are, how not so good we are in life, we're all going to experience some sort of adversity. And I think the thing is with adversity is it doesn't discriminate, but it's not necessarily about us being bad people or deserving these negative things. I think it's more so that there's an opportunity to grow and there's an opportunity to heal. So this is a poem called Brokenness. There are too many broken people, broke into pieces they think they cannot fix. Like a shattered glass, they may cut you when you try to uplift, slicing the helping hands, hoping to heal the harm that's happened to them. They often hurt in silence, smile in your face today, but tomorrow you may hear of how their brokenness has escalated into acts of violence. We often judge these broken people and then call them names, label them, sometimes forgetting that, like flipping a coin, they too can change. But what does it really mean to be broken when it is broken people that have helped mend the world? I realize that in our brokenness is when our true lives unfurl. Because see, brokenness is a sign of recreation. It is a sign of growth. But we fear brokenness because we fear the unknown and uncertainty. But brokenness can piece our wholes together perfectly, sometimes permanently. After all, if you have never known brokenness, then how would you know when you are whole? If you've never been broken, then how would you measure your growth? Thank you.
That was incredible. And I want to go back to that last line. If you've never experienced brokenness, how can you measure growth? How can you expand more on that line? I'm sure I mangled it because that was really emotional. I think it's going to help a lot of people. So can you talk more about that last line?
I think there's something to be said about the notion of brokenness in this society that, wants to see us as perfect, that doesn't want us to wear our emotions, that doesn't want us to be vulnerable. And I think something about society, about poetry that I've learned and life in general that I've learned is that all of us have gone through stuff. We've all been traumatized in one way, shape, or form. And so my perspective is, what do you do with the trauma? How do you move forward? So again, it's kind of this dichotomy of how do you appreciate the good things in life if you haven't experienced the bad? I think we're more grateful for the good things in life after overcoming some of those bad things. And it's not to say that you deserve it to happen, but I think it's more so that we can only really measure how far we've come when we can look back at where we've been.
I want to ask you something, and obviously you don't have to talk about it if you don't feel comfortable. But there was a time in your life when you had the opportunity to, you were playing basketball, you had the opportunity to, see the world. You had this really great summer. One of the places that you went to was, you went to India. You come back, you were valid Victorian, and everything was going great. And then Caravana weekend, something happened to you. And again, you don't have to talk about it if you don't feel comfortable. But the reason why I brought it up is that I think we all encounter certain things in our lives and we are given two choices. You can stop and kind of just fall apart, or you can feel the things that you need to feel, and then find a way to move forward. And I think this pandemic has been one of those things where you're just trying to find that thing to help you move forward, because everything just feels out of your own control. So again, if you don't want to talk about it, you can tell me, nah, beat it. But I just wanted to ask you, how did you find what happened, and how did you find the strength, the I guess the foresight to kind of push through it and move forward?
Yeah, and I don't mind sharing. It's a part of my journey that I've experienced. And I think more so what I've learned about my life is my story is my story. I can't change it, but I'm grateful for it because it allowed me to be the man I am today. So it was the summer of 2009. It was August 3rd. And essentially what happened was a few of my friends went out to go celebrate. It was a month before I was about to start university. And I remember leaving the club, and essentially what happened was I was robbed. My three of my friends were robbed by a group of guys, and they stabbed me in my elbow, and they also stabbed me in my back as well too. And it was probably one of the worst experiences that ever happened to me, mainly because these guys took my stuff and then they tried to stab me and take my life that night. As difficult as that experience was, I remember after what happened was my friends wanted to retaliate. And I thought, well, my friends who want to retaliate are not too different from the guys who attacked me, because violence was the way that they were using. They were using violence to deal with their issues. And so essentially what I realized was that if my friends felt comfortable to use violence as a way to deal with their issues, or my issue to be exact, there's something to be said about these hurt and broken people in society that feel like it's okay to attack people, to stab people. So I wonder, what could I do? How could I give back so that the next young man doesn't have to deal with what I dealt with? Because there's a notion that hurt people, and that these guys only did what they did to me because they were hurt, and I'm sure they're dealing with their own traumatic experiences. So I had some empathy for them, because they reminded me of my friends. And so starting Rise was exactly what I did. There's something called design thinking, and design thinking is really looking at a problem and asking, once you look at the problem, really deepening your understanding of the problem, where you can fall in love with the problem. And I fell in love with this problem of violence in our city and the lack of safe spaces for young people. And so that's how I created Rise. Rise is a not-for-profit organization, social enterprise that really looks to create safe spaces for young people to express themselves in a positive way. Because in my research, what I've learned is a lot of young people turn to violence because they have trauma that is festered inside of them. And so that's essentially what happened to me, but it ended up becoming one of the best things that happened to me, ironically, because I guess I believe that all of us are alchemists, that we can all take rocky moments and turn those rocky moments into golden opportunities.
I'm so sorry that you went through that, and I'm very, very glad that you're still here to do this important work.
Hmm.
And The Alchemist, one of my favorites, Paulo Coelho, one of my favorite books. You mentioned Rise, and you just kind of threw it out there, but Rise has become, before the pandemic, it was an important part of your neighborhood. Um, you know, Looking back, how do you think Rise has helped the community?
So when I think about what Rise has done in the community, when I think about how it's been a pillar for so many young people who are looking for an opportunity to express themselves, an opportunity to heal, an opportunity to connect with other young like-minded folks, or just an opportunity to be inspired to kind of push forward through the challenges that they've been going through. It was a very important part of our community because it was a weekly event where it's the same place, the same time. You didn't necessarily have to pay to get in. It was just more so looking like, I think what I love the most about Rise is people would travel all the way from Brampton. I mean, literally would travel from Brampton and
That's far.
Oshawa. I'm telling you, to come to Malvern.
Yeah.
And they would travel, and sometimes they would leave only to catch the last bus or miss the last bus. And I guess it goes to show that young people really needed this. It was so important and vital in the community. So just really quickly, we started off by building the safe space. And after young people continued to come, they were looking to learn more about being an artist. So we started an initiative where we would teach them about the business of being an artist, the business of being a professional artist, and getting them connected to mentors such as Mark Stoddard as well. And the third portion of it is we wanted to employ them and give them opportunities to go out there and get paid. So whether it was connecting them with the city of Toronto or connecting them to different corporations so that they could perform and get paid, that was essentially what we decided to do, because it was needed. It was really needed to let them know that your art matters, your art is meaningful.
And it does matter. Randell, thank you so much for spending some time with us. We're also proud of you and can't wait to see the things that you do as Ontario's first ever Poet Laureate. Congratulations, and yay, Scarborough!
Thank you so much, Nam. I appreciate it.
Children and Youth Mental Health Services has been running full tilt across the province during this pandemic, but are they keeping up? With us on that, both in the provincial capital, are Eastern Ontario Hub journalist Marsha McLeod and Ashley Okwuosa, assistant editor for TVO.org. Good to see you both again.
Hi.
All right, Marsha, I'm going to start with you. The article that you guys both worked on showed how the need for mental health care exceeds capacity. Can you catch us up to speed on the issue?
What we really found in our reporting is that the system is operating at peak capacity, just like you said. And we know that before the pandemic, actually, there was about 28,000 children and youth in Ontario who were waiting for community-based mental health support. And what we found is that during the pandemic, the number of children in some settings and with some conditions who are reaching out for care is increasing, and in particular with respect to eating disorders. So we heard that at Sick Kids, for instance, their number of admissions to their eating disorder unit has increased 55% over the duration of the pandemic compared to last year. And that as well, clinicians really told us that children are showing up more sick when they arrive at the hospital and are requiring more intensive care when they do arrive.
Now, this was an article that took several weeks to put together. Ashley, can you tell us a little bit about the methodology behind it?
Yeah, I guess so. We started with really trying to understand the scope of the problem. And by doing that, we just started looking at existing media coverage. And we found that in the US emergency rooms, we're seeing about 4 times more children and youth than normal. And like Marsha said, children and youth with the most complex mental health disorders are waiting the longest. So when we had a scope of that, we knew what kinds of questions we wanted to ask. We also knew that hotlines and helplines were seeing a spike. So we were able to gather data from Kids Help Phone, for example, and we found that about 4.5 million children and youth across Canada were calling. And in Ontario specifically, some of the major concerns were anxiety, stress, depression. And we also wanted to, get this information directly from hospitals in terms of capacity. So we created a short survey and sent it to about 22 hospitals in Ontario. We wanted to find out if at all their capacity had changed because of the pandemic and if they were seeing an increase in the number of referrals to their inpatient eating disorder programs, if they had any. And we definitely wanted to get the family perspective. So we really turned to Facebook groups online. Obviously, a lot of, in-person communication and, wasn't happening. So that was definitely one avenue that we used to find families to speak to us.
Now, Marsha, you mentioned eating disorders. You guys learned that eating disorders among youth are on the rise. Do we have an idea of what's attributing to that?
One clinician at Sick Kids said to us that a possible explanation is really the isolation and loss of routine that so many children are facing during this pandemic. And she also cautiously suggested that another contributing factor could be the increased internet time for children during the pandemic. And really what that means, though, is increased access to sort of dieting or exercise content. And another clinician in Kingston said to us, really look at the loss that children have faced, whether that's and of their outlets of school, of maybe of seeing friends, of sports. And even one parent of a child who's struggling with an eating disorder, she said to us that she thought that perhaps her daughter's eating disorder and this real intense focus on dieting and exercise was sort of a misplaced way for her to put her energy and focus onto something in a time where so much was up in the air.
Actually, I want to follow up on that. When we talk about eating disorders, what's at risk when young people have to wait for the right type of treatment?
I think Marsha alluded to this, but like clinicians have told us that young people are coming in more serious condition. And, one clinician said, we'd like to be getting to these kids much earlier, because if not, they're coming in what was described as medically compromised situations, which could look like, a lower resting heart rate, for example. And I think really the emotional and physical strain on the youth themselves who are experiencing the eating disorders and the families who are really seeking help. We saw a lot of parents and going to the emergency room repeatedly because their children were repeatedly in crisis because they didn't have help in the community. So that was one thing we definitely saw.
Now, concerned medical professionals say that the province's child and youth mental health system was severely overburdened well before the pandemic, and it's now worsened. Marsha, do we have an idea of what the government has been doing over the past 14 months?
In October of 2020, the Ontario government invested about $24 million into children and youth mental health. And we also know that in February of this year, they invested about $10 million into something called secure mental health treatment. Some advocates, and particularly at one center, including one center in Oakville, this is something that advocates found a little bit confusing because less than a week later, the government actually cut funding to that same center for very similar type of treatment to which they just funded. But overall, we do know that advocates say that the investments have not been enough, and that one estimate by an organization called CMHO says that $150 million is the annual price tag of getting the system up to where it needs to be. So that means an additional $150 million every single year to get to the place where children aren't waiting months or even up to years on wait lists for counseling and therapy services.
Now, you guys mentioned the Facebook groups. You spoke to a number of families who are struggling right now with getting the right kind of treatment. Ashley, I want to ask you, what stories stood out to you?
So there's this one family, Amber, Tom, and Hannah, Amber being the daughter, and they're based in Burlington. And it's been what can only be described as a roller coaster for them in terms of seeking help. Their daughter had dealt with an eating disorder prior and faced what, she described as a relapse during the pandemic. Over the last year, their daughter was admitted to McMaster Children's Hospital 4 times. And when she turned 18, was admitted to another, hospital multiple times. Finally, she was able to get help. She was actually able to get access to an inpatient program, and she was there for about a month. But I think what stood out to me really was the strength that this family was definitely able to, to muster in what was undeniably a difficult time in their life.
I want to actually ask you both this question. Overall, you guys have spent several weeks putting this together, speaking to a number of people. What is your takeaway from having done this research? And I'll start with Ashley.
So the general concern from physicians about what happens when the pandemic is over, that was evident. There was some certainty from them that there will be long-term effects to the mental health of children and youth because of what they're experiencing now. Of course, like a clinician said, we've never really been in this kind of situation before, so nobody knows what the future is going to hold. But they were fairly certain that the mental impact of this on children and youth will be felt for a considerable length of time.
And Marsha, I want to ask you any kind of takeaways. I know you spoke to also a number of clinicians and families as well. Was there anything that stood out to you? And was there anything, a takeaway from the research that you guys did?
I think what stood out to me and even just sort of with respect to what the family that Ashley shared about is, and so many of the families that we talk to, is just how tired they are. 14 months into the pandemic, just that they have shown, such capacity and resilience, but that it has been so exhausting, and that really a lot of the informal supports that they would have relied on are gone, whether that's, family or church or after school programs. One parent said to me that I hope after COVID that we really just have more energy, because right now we're just trying to get through the day.
I do want a quick little follow-up with you guys in terms of, if parents are seeing this and, their children are struggling, where can they go?
It is a very complicated question. And it's hard for us to say, parents can just look up this internet address and find out exactly where to go. And in fact, I think even the question just brings up that it really is such a complicated thing. And often it starts with the family doctor, but from there, often parents and families are zigzagging all around the system. And it often takes years to kind of get to where they need to go.
There are some community organizations that have come up with, like the Rock Center for Outreach. They've come up with programs that really are targeted at help seeking, right? So parents can call and say, this is kind of what's going on, or children can call themselves, and they're able to direct families to where they need to go. But like Marsha said, it really is a maze.
Marsha McLeod and Ashley Okwuosa, thank you guys both.
The agenda this week looked at Ontario's pandemic response, the future of virtual healthcare, and declining male fertility. We begin with the state of kids' mental health.
What do you think has been the most damaging risk for kids, both now and in the long term?
The most damaging thing is really hard to distill, because I think this is like a complex chronic stressor that not just kids, but we're all experiencing collectively as adults. And in the context of that, what I've seen and heard with the young people that I work with really are two main concerns. The first is how this has affected learning. Now, there's no one size fits all. Everybody's different. Some people are actually thriving and doing okay. So we have to resist overgeneralization. But there are many young people who are really struggling with distance learning. They lack the kinds of individual supports that they need, particularly young people who might struggle with attention or learning difficulties already. And that's leading to further deterioration in their mental health. The other group are people who struggle with situations where there's high degrees of conflict in their home, and they're feeling stuck. They're feeling like they don't have an outlet. And many of these young people, like was said earlier, are struggling with hope. And that's really what keeps me up at night, is that sense of dread and hopelessness, which is important for us as adults to help counter by sharing hope and spreading hope wherever we can.
Sherry, can I just follow up with you, because you mentioned hope as well. Is the loss of hope related to they think this pandemic's never going to end, or what is it?
I think it's probably quite multifactored. I think it is the idea that it's not going to end. The end doesn't seem to be in sight anytime soon. And I think it's just what others have mentioned around the loss of their peer group, their social supports, their extracurriculars. And I'm still hearing from many that the expectations aren't changing. They're still expected to do well at school, get their A's, attend class. And I think there's a real imbalance between what they're going through and how they're functioning and what's being expected.
Well, we should still, I should ask, I shouldn't assume. Should we not still expect kids to get good marks?
I think we can hope that they will. And I think when the moment's right, we can expect them to. Yet I think it just feeds into that pressure that I was speaking about a few minutes ago. You know, many of the kids I work with and that I'm hearing about from colleagues, they're happy if they get out of bed in the morning and eat breakfast. That at this point, especially in the late end, the end of the school year, they're completely exhausted. They have no enlivenment, no fulfillment. There's no spontaneity in their day. They are just dreading every minute of their day. So I do think that we have to listen to them and we have to dig into their experience and what they're going through. And I do think the expectations have to settle down a little. I think we've got to take our foot off the gas pedal.
Now, Kathy, I don't know how to ask this well, so I'm just going to ask it, and it will be inelegantly asked, but you'll get the drift of what I'm talking about here. Of course, the kids that the three of you are dealing with are having among the toughest times in the country. Do you think they are reflective of the entire, say, under 18 population right now?
It's a great question. And we are speaking to kids in every province and territory. So I do agree that the sense of hopelessness, isolation, fear, there is a lot of fear we're hearing from kids across Canada right now, afraid for their own health, for their families, for well-being. I also agree that the isolation is creating different dynamics within the home, and the expectation day to day is really stressing our kids out, and we hear it every single day on our platform. So answering to your question, this is a national crisis that we are seeing. And I also want to make sure we remember that what we're going through now, and I do see a lot of hope actually from the young people that reach out. And the hope I see is that they are reaching out, that they are learning help-seeking behaviors, and they continue to do so. That is a really good resiliency coping mechanism that we are seeing at Kids Help Phone. What we worry about is the trauma that is coming from this past year. And let's remember, it's not just COVID, and it sounds weird to talk about just COVID because it's been pretty traumatic. But in there has been the shootings in Nova Scotia. There's been huge unrest around social injustice. And we saw major spikes on our platform around the murder of George Floyd and all the issues around social justice. So I am incredibly worried about this year, next year, the year after. And if we forget this trauma as a country and as a government, we will have let our kids down.
Last week, we saw two pretty significant developments happen. First, the Auditor General, who is a neutral arbiter of things at Queen's Park, she came out with a report. And then the Premier's own appointed long-term care task force gave its findings as well. So two big reports coming out. And I guess I just like, Jeff, I know you've written a lot about this. I'd like you to just weigh in and tell us what you think some of the, I guess, one or two most important takeaways from those reports were that we should know about.
Well, I guess the main takeaway is that problem of the long-term care cannot be addressed or resolved at all until we put an awful lot more money into the system. It's got to be done. Got to, I guess, start with long-term care homes. Get rid of all those wards. Everybody in the long-term care needs to be in a private room with a private bath. That means rehabilitating all of the older multi-room ward systems, all of the older rooms, and tearing down a bunch of them, which is going to be terribly expensive. I think we've got to do something about the inspection system, which has been a farce, frankly, and it's cut back more by the Ford government. No government has paid a whole lot of attention to proper inspection of long-term care for decades. It's been worse recently. Inspectors don't go out frequently when they should. They have a system of notifying the owners and operators of long-term care before they come, so people won't quickly bring in temporary workers, so it looks as though they've got more staff than they have. And they don't. They find things wrong. They don't follow up and chase it down. And if long-term care facilities are constantly violating the regulations, nothing happens. So that's if there are better inspections, that would help a great deal. But I think over the long term, Steve, what you really got to look at is shifting the emphasis away from institutional care, like long-term care homes, and getting more and more into home care. Take care of people at home. Keep as many as you can out of long-term care. They'll do better at home. Their chances of survival are better. They'll enjoy a happier life. And what's the average? They say somebody goes into long-term care, they're dead on average within 2 years. I think this is a lot better, survive a lot better if they can stay at home, closer to family, with regular care coming in to look after them.
Every poll I've seen says people would prefer to live and, frankly, to die at home as opposed to in institutional care. Laura, as you talk to people in the provincial government, clearly the long-term care system has been treated as, in some respects, like a poor second cousin in the healthcare family. Based on your conversations, based on your reporting, do you see any determination in the current government of Ontario to do something about all this?
Well, I think what we've seen throughout this pandemic, and particularly with the release of these reports, is just how completely sidelined the long-term care sector was, how unprepared they were. They were cast aside, and the stories coming out of the Commission's report are just devastating, and frankly, like they're hard to read, and they really pull at your heartstrings. They are so sad. The way that these staff would cry outside homes, the way these people died alone without family, it's seriously disturbing. I think that the Ford government, throughout this has seen how damaging this has been for them, and they are trying to do something about it. And we've seen many announcements about homes to be built and good news announcements in their minds. I mean, the trouble is that these are years, if not decades away. And the Ford government does have to answer for, as the professor mentioned, the lack of comprehensive inspections, why there was no preparation between the first and second wave, which I think the public views as inexcusable. And the minister has to take some responsibility for this, and we've seen a real resistance on her part. So yes, I think there's certainly a recognition that this needs to change and that there needs to be infrastructure built, but also the Commission talks about a wholehearted change in the way that the sector is run. While profit could play a part potentially in building these homes, that shouldn't be the sole purpose of running a long-term care home. So there is a lot of soul searching that needs to be done now, and I think this is going to be one of those major issues that dogs the government heading into the next election.
To that end, Dr. Collins, do you think there is a concern of virtual care being seen as somehow the default kind of care that is provided, and doctors in the future might only actually see their patients in person on rarer occasions?
Well, certainly, Steve, CMA's view on that is that virtual care is never meant to replace in-person care. It's meant to be complementary, and ideally it should be used where there is an established doctor-patient relationship. Certainly, I think that you make a good point, and we are only going to see an explosion of further devices, artificial intelligence, other adjuncts to virtual care that will be able to expand its use. But no, at the end of the day, when a person presents with a problem and you can manage it so far, perhaps with virtual care, there should be someone at the end of that care relationship that can actually see the patient. There are times when you know that you're not making the mark, you're not hitting the mark, you're not knowing what's wrong with this patient. You have to see them, you have to bring them in, you have to touch them, you have to lay your hands on. And of course, there are many other things that we currently provide as services in primary care, like immunizations and other screening procedures that need to be done in person with contact.
Dr. Affleck, let me try this with you. Are there safety concerns around the use of virtual care?
In short, yes, Steve, there are safety concerns. And there's safety concerns with any use of technology in healthcare. So we have to be very prudent with that. A very simple way to look at it is that a lot of issues happen between the interface in care. So if you see your family doctor and they refer you to a specialist, or if you're seeing a rehab person or you're going for surgery, the interface between those services, if information is lost, if lab results are lost, x-rays, whatever, communication of any sort is lost, then the individual caring for you will have less information on which to adjudicate your care, and potentially errors can be made, or your care may just be, you will not get the follow-up you require, right, for something that is time sensitive. So virtual care by definition involves the use of information, or the transmission, exchange of information between services and individuals. And so we have to ensure that that occurs in a way that assures the integrity of the information. Otherwise, it can be unsafe. And I will just finish this statement by saying there's not a long tradition of evaluating the safety of these technologies. We evaluate them with respect to privacy and security, but not safety. So this is something as a collective in Canada we need to begin addressing.
Let me follow up with Dr. Thompson on that. Are you concerned that virtual care opens the door for more examples of misdiagnosis?
I think there is that potential. I think part of what's being discussed here, and certainly Anne referenced this, and Ewan as well, is that these technologies work best in an existing relationship. So, we have the advantage of knowing our patients well, but certainly we need the whole story. And so one of the dangers is if there's episodic care, whether it's virtual or face-to-face for that matter, at a walk-in clinic, not having the full background on the patient can really pose some serious issues. So, this will be the challenge going forward, is the types of clinical encounters we have, or the types of problems. For example, acute chest pain, not appropriate, right? As it might be a triage encounter that you have, but really that person needs to be seen urgently at hospital. I do know of one case apparently that went off the rails. It was apparently a necrotizing, a pancreatitis. Patient presented with abdominal pain. It was a virtual encounter, and the physician was found, unfortunately, to be responsible for not managing that appropriately. It was disciplined. It should have been triaged to the hospital. Now, that being said, that's a diagnosis you could miss in your office and putting hands on the abdomen and feeling. So, part of this involves what sort of relationship we have with the patients. They have to trust us that we're doing the best for them, but we also have to make sure that if we're thinking of a more serious diagnosis, what's the best way to triage and deal with this, right? And it may mean disengaging from the virtual and going to a deeper encounter that's going to be a face-to-face in hospital or in clinic.
Here are some numbers and a quote from your book to get us started. In 2017, you examined the findings from 185 studies involving nearly 43,000 men that had been conducted over a 38-year span. And you found that between the years 1973 and 2011, sperm concentration, in other words, the number of sperm per milliliter of semen, dropped more than 52% among random men in Western countries. Meanwhile, the total sperm count fell by more than 59%. And you write, the current state of reproductive affairs can't continue much longer without threatening human survival. Now, that all sounds extremely alarming, but genuinely, how concerned do you think we ought to be?
Well, obviously, I'm concerned because I wrote that, and I feel that the current state of reproductive health is really pretty serious. And the number, when we last looked at the sperm concentration, there were 47 million sperm per milliliter median worldwide. So that number dropping from 99 in 1973, that's a huge decline. And what that means is that at 47, we're very close to 40. So 40 million sperm per milliliter sounds like a lot of sperm. It is a lot of sperm, but it turns out that when a man's concentration drops below 40, then a lot of things kick in. His probability of conceiving goes down, the number, or the per cycle pregnancy rate goes down, and actually he himself experiences an earlier age of death because there's a lifetime consequence of this poor sperm count. So now that we are arguably at around 40, because that, if the decline continued, which we don't know yet, then we would certainly be below 40 million per milliliter, and in that area of impaired fertility. And so with a lot of the world in that place, and seeing the increase in assisted reproduction, decreases in total fertility rate, I believe that we're in a serious problem.
This is a problem in the developed world. Is it also a problem in the developing world?
We have much less data, much fewer studies from developing countries. That's because these sperm count studies take a certain level of technology and sophistication, but we're getting more of them, and we're hoping in an update that we're doing, we'll get more information. But the fertility decline, which is the number of children born per woman, that has been worldwide at about the same rate. So the total number of children born in 1960 was 5 per woman or couple worldwide, and that has dropped to 2.4 worldwide in 2019. So that's the same roughly rate of decline in fertility and sperm count, and it is worldwide for fertility. It's going on in every country. And many countries, particularly Western countries, are now below replacement. So this is not just a Western problem.
The thesis of this conversation now having been established, let's bring our other two guests in here and get some reaction from them as to this information we've just received. Linda, why don't you start us off here? Shauna has written that this is a global existential crisis. What do you think?
I tend to agree with Shauna. About 15 years ago, there was a movie some people may remember called Children of Men, which posited that there was extremely low fertility and it was a huge problem. I think that that is, for the world, I'm not sure overall, with well over 7 to 8 billion people on our planet, I'm not sure that fertility is a problem when you look at it that way, but when you look certainly at an individual couple or individual people, it is a problem. And I think that the data is growing and extensive, that it's not only male fertility, which has decreased, but also female fertility as well.
Richard, what say you?
Well, I think there's a major problem with male reproductive health for sure. I think that the global reduction in couple fertility is an issue where we have two factors at play. The one that we're concerned about now, which is adverse changes in sperm counts in men, and thus in couple fertility, and societal changes, which have had a huge impact on couple fertility when they're trying for children, and also how many they want to end up having. So it can be difficult to disentangle those two. But I think that the biggest impact of having lots of men with low sperm counts is another societal change, and that is the delay of couples in trying for children until the female partner is in her 30s. That's becoming now almost the most common situation, because at that time, fertility in the female is much reduced compared with when she's in her early 20s. And that means that sperm count becomes a much bigger player.
Let me read something that was recently published in the New York Times, and this will highlight one word in particular, and that word is languishing. Languishing is a sense of stagnation and emptiness, and it might be the dominant emotion of 2021. It is the neglected middle child of mental health. It's the void between depression and flourishing, the absence of well-being. You don't have symptoms of mental illness, but you're not the picture of mental health either. You're not functioning at full capacity. Languishing dulls your motivation, disrupts your ability to focus, and triples the odds, that you'll cut back on work. It appears to be more common than major depression, and in some ways, it may be a bigger risk factor for mental illness. As soon as I said the word, you said, oh yeah. So I gather this is not news to you.
No, this is, it's an interesting fact. One of the things that often happens in new situations, pandemics, is things that we know about get given new labels, and those new labels get some currency. And that's not to say it's wrong. And the fact that people identify with the word languishing, I think, is very important. But the description of languishing seems very similar to the description of mild depression, mild anxiety. And it would be interesting to know whether you can differentiate the two. The important thing about it is some people say, well, this isn't important because it's not a serious mental health problem and it doesn't need medical intervention. And I would say, well, you're right. It doesn't possibly doesn't need medical intervention, but it is an important problem. If we, in a thought economy, in a service economy, in the economy we have, we need people to be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in order to push forwards. If we want to build back better, we all need to be on our A game. And languishing, which is mental distress, which is mental I can say not mental, is mental ill health. I didn't want to say that because it sounds so crummy, but it's certainly not well-being. It's going to be important. We have to have a strategy to deal with it. That strategy may not be a medical or clinical strategy, but it may be online strategies. It may be that we have to think about equipping each other with the ability to work through it. But it is going to be important that we deal with it. Interestingly, one of the things that I saw on the Statistics Canada website was the impact of the CERB on mental health and mental distress.
And you can see a decrease in mental well-being in Canada as the pandemic started to roll out. And you can see the impacts particularly on low-income groups. And then as the CERB was rolled out, you can see that a significant uptick in mental well-being, and I would imagine also decreasing the amount of languishing that was happening in Canada. So when we're thinking about what we're going to do about languishing, we possibly have to think about how we can equip ourselves. We possibly need to think about what advice we can give ourselves to be more mentally healthy. But we also have to think about the situations we find ourselves in, or we put people in, and think about what we can do to decrease the worries and decrease the stress and give people the opportunity to work through what is a very difficult and traumatic time for a lot of people.
That's just some of what we covered this week on The Agenda. For more, including the full conversations, you can visit our website, tvo.org, our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda, or our Twitter feed, twitter.com/theagenda. And that's it for this Friday, May 7th, 2021. Monday, why have lumber prices skyrocketed across North America? We're looking at that. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thank you for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great weekend, and Steve will see you on Monday.
Ontario Hubs are made possible by the Barry and Laurie Green Family Charitable Trust and Goldie Feldman. And by viewers like you. Thank you.